Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about private equity possibly getting into the Big 12 as well as maybe naming rights for the league, maybe the All-State 12 coming down the road, but don't necessarily love that by any means. But let's get into the second segment here. Let's talk about Ohio State. When we talk about, college football going into this year, the conversation usually starts with Ohio State and Georgia. I think those are the two teams kind of setting the pace for pretty much everyone else going into the season, and Ohio State and Georgia have been the two top bet teams, Ohio State being the most bet team to win the national title this upcoming year, and it seems like everything is in place for them to do that. They have an incredible roster, a really good coaching staff, a lot of things going for them, but they don't necessarily have a trend that has kind of formed over the last 10 years that they might need to win a national title. So let's get into this and start to break this down because this is really interesting. One of the things that has kind of happened over the last little bit in college football is immense amounts of change every single year with rosters, with coaches, with everything in between. But one of the things that has kind of won you national championships throughout that time is consistency. The last 10 national title winners dating back to the college football playoff era, so starting in 2014 with Ohio State's last national title, you have to return at least 3 of the 4 between the head coach, the offensive coordinator, the defensive coordinator, and the quarterback. If you return 3 of those 4 guys, you're good to go. You're definitely in the national title conversation. Also, among that, the top 10 or the last 10 national title winners finished top 13 in the final rankings from the previous season. So kind of gives you an idea of the trends that are kind of being followed, and the teams that, follow it and don't follow it might have a better shot to win a national title. So Ryan Day obviously back as the head coach. Jim Knowles back as the defensive coordinator, but you do introduce a new face in Chip Kelly and Will Howard coming in as your starting quarterback. Those are 2 of the 4, so doesn't necessarily fit the parameters of the past champions. They obviously were in the top 13 to end last year, so they fit there just fine, but don't necessarily fit this one. So I want to get into the teams that actually do fit this, the teams that just missed the cut that also fit the top 13 ranking, but also I want to get into the teams that didn't follow this in the past 26 years. I believe it's only 3 in the last 26 years. So let's get into this real quick, and let's start with the teams that have this, that are following this trend, and it starts with Georgia. They're returning absolutely everyone. Kirby Smart is back. Mike Bobo's back. Glenn Schumann's back, although they added Charvarius Robinson as a co-defensive coordinator. And then you have Carson Beck back at quarterback. Same thing with Texas. You have Steve Sarkisian, Kyle Flood at OC, Pete Kwiatkowski at defensive coordinator, and then Quinn Ewers at quarterback. And then Ole Miss is the last one that returns all 4. You have Lane Kiffin, obviously. You have Charlie Weiss Jr. You have Pete Golding at defensive coordinator, and then Jackson Dart at the quarterback position. So those are the 3 teams, that return all 4, which is an absolutely huge thing for them going into this season. But then you have a couple that return 3, and they're really, really good teams as well. Oregon is one of them. Diane Lanning obviously back, Will Stein obviously back, Tosh Lupoy back at defensive coordinator. Dylan Gabriel's the new face in this room, and he is the quarterback coming into the season. If you were to ask me, I don't think they took too big of a drop off between him and Bo Nix. Maybe you won't have quite the same running ability, although Dylan Gabriel is not necessarily a slouch running the ball by any means. But then you have Missouri that returns 3 out of the 4. The only person they replace is Blake Baker at the defensive coordinator position. So Eli Drinkwitz obviously back. Kirby Moore has done a great job at offensive coordinator around there. And then you have Brady Cook at quarterback, which is absolutely huge for them. And then Florida State is kind of like Oregon. They return all of the coaches they need, but add DJ Uiagalelei as their new quarterback, filling in for Jordan Travis, from a year ago. But they still have Mike Norvell, still have Alex Atkins, one of my favorite coaches in the entire country, and then Adam Fuller as well. So they're going to be more than fine. These are the teams that follow this trend. All of these teams have a very good shot to win a national title. I think they're all in that mix. Missouri's the one that you might not necessarily put in this mix with the rest of this group, but it's going to be a really good team. They have every ability to make some noise. Frankly, I think they have the best offensive player in the entire country in Luther Burden, so I think they can do some really, really remarkable things up there in Columbia and maybe just take some people by surprise this upcoming year. But let's get to a couple of teams that just missed the cut, but also finished top 13 last year, so fit one criteria but don't fit the other, maybe the more important one, to be totally honest. But Let's start with Ohio State. Obviously, we talked about it. Ryan Day is back. You have Chip Kelly coming in. He will be calling plays now. Probably a good thing for Ohio State in the long term, if I'm being honest. And then you have Jim Knowles back at defensive coordinator. He has done just an incredible job with that defense since he's showed up in Columbus. And then you have Will Howard coming in. Obviously, a very, very big topic of conversation. Can he do the things that you need him to do? It'll be really, really fascinating to watch that guy unfold, and if it really matters, because he could be, 2022 Will Howard, and they could tear people to pieces. So it might not matter. It might matter. Who knows? But Penn State also returns 2 out of the 4. They return their head coach and their quarterback. James Franklin's back. Drew Aller's back. But Andy Kotelnicki and Tom Allen at the coordinator positions might be the most important people in the Big Ten this upcoming year. If they hit, Penn State has everything they need to win a Big Ten title, but those guys absolutely have to hit the way that some guys in the past have not quite at those positions. But let's keep going down the list here. We have Alabama only returns 1 out of the 4. Obviously, the coaching staff turnover plays a huge part in that. You add Kalen DeBoer, Nick Sheridan, and Kane Womack at the head coach and coordinator positions, and then Jalen Milroe being back. I would argue it might be the most important person to be back is Jalen Milroe for that team, but it'll be really interesting to see how that new head coaching staff kind of finds their way in this new world. And then Oklahoma returns 1 out of the 4. Jackson Arnold obviously got that start at the end of the season, but is a new starter nonetheless. You have Brent Venables coming back, but then added Seth Luttrell as your offensive coordinator. Zach Alley's the new defensive coordinator around there, which is a hire I really like. I think he's going to be a really good coach in the next couple of years. And then you have LSU with 1 out of the 4. Again, the head coach being the one that stays the same. You have Joe Sloan and Cortez Hankton taking over as your OCs, Blake Baker as the defensive coordinator, and then Garrett Nussmeier, the guy that I'm so excited to watch. I am definitely a part of the Nuss bus. Cannot wait to see that guy get on the field. Michigan, I have at a 0.5 out of 4, although it is 0 out of 4 technically, but I think Sharon Moore still being on staff gives them at least half a point. But Sharon Moore moves up to the head coaching position, Kirk Campbell in at the offensive coordinator, Wink Martindale at defensive coordinator, and then obviously Alex Orji is the new quarterback around there. And then you have Washington, the team that, took everyone by surprise a year ago and then had everything change on them. You have Jed Fish in as the new head coach. You have a very, very talented young play caller. I am blanking on his first name. I very much apologize. Carroll is their offensive coordinator. And then you have Steve Belichick coming in from the Patriots to be their defensive coordinator, which will be a very interesting thing to watch. And then Will Rogers will likely be their quarterback this upcoming year. So a lot of change around the country. A couple of teams that are staying very, very much the same. Georgia, Ole Miss, and Texas are obviously hanging out. They have everyone coming back, but a couple of different changes in there. But I want to give you an idea of the teams that have kind of bucked this trend. There's 3 in the last 26 national title winners that have done this and kind of, made this trend irrelevant. And it's 3 just ridiculous teams. Miami in 2001, as we all know, is one of the greatest rosters that's ever been assembled in college football. Ken Dorsey was the only returner on this team at quarterback. Butch Davis had moved on, so Larry Coker, who was the OC before, was the head coach. They brought in a new OC, brought in a new defensive coordinator. So a lot of turnover, but when you have all the dudes that they had, it was going to be a really good proposition for you to get at least in that conversation for a national title. The 2007 LSU one was obviously a crazy one that many people didn't even expect until the last week of the season because of how crazy that year was. But they had Les Miles and Bo Pelini coming back for their 3rd season. Matt Flynn was a first-year starter, and then Gary Crowton was the defensive coordinator in his first year over there. And then Florida State in 2013. Jimbo Fisher was the only returner, but he was the OC and the head coach at that time. So technically returned 2 positions, but 1 guy. You brought in Jameis, obviously, as a first-year starter, just lit the world on fire. And then Jeremy Pruitt was coming in as his first year as defensive coordinator. So those are the teams that kind of buck this trend. 3 just incredible teams, obviously, but Ohio State's incredible as well. Can they kind of buck this trend? Can they be the team that moves forward? If you were to ask me, I would say yes. I think they upgraded up 2 of the positions that they changed. I think the offensive coordinator position was one that just needed to change. It needed to be Ryan Day as the overarching head coach, and then someone calling plays, fully focusing on that. And they got one of the best in the business in Chip Kelly. And I think frankly, it was an upgrade from the guy that they first hired, and Bill O'Brien, in my mind. So I think they did a fine job there. I also think going from Kyle McCord to Will Howard is an upgrade. Will Howard is still a little bit of an unknown, especially when you're playing, the Big Ten teams that he's going to play week after week. But I think he's going to be fine. I think he's going to be a really good quarterback. He knows how to execute an offense. I think his running ability is going to be a huge part of this offense and definitely kind of open them up a little bit more. So I think they upgraded at both those spots. So does it necessarily matter that they only have two guys coming back? I'm not necessarily super sold on that idea. I think the two that they have coming back in Ryan Day and Jim Knowles in particular are just incredible. So I'm not necessarily too worried. If you are, really subscribed to this idea, your six national champions are the people that are the six teams that will, your national champion will come from these six teams. I couldn't figure out how I wanted to phrase that. UGA, Texas, Oregon, Florida State, Missouri, or Ole Miss. Those are your teams. If you really believe in this and you want to follow the last decade of evidence that has proven that, pick one of those teams and keep it moving. Now, last year it was 4 out of 4 for Michigan. The year before that it was 3 out of 4 for UGA, with only Dan Lanning moving on. So it's going to be a really interesting thing to watch in a landscape that is always changing with roster moves and coaching moves and everything in between. Knowing that continuity is the one that wins out makes me pretty happy. I got to be totally honest with you. So I think it's going to be really interesting to watch this. Ohio State is still going to be in the top of the Big Ten. They're still going to be the class of college football, but they have a couple of changes, and if those don't hit, then it could spell disaster for the Buckeyes. But we'll take our second break here, and when we come back, we're going to keep talking about the Big Ten here for a second. We're going to talk about Iowa and USC and how Tim Lester, the new OC at Iowa, and DeAnton Lynn, the new DC at USC, might just have a lot of power in their hands if they can make things happen in year one. So we'll break that down right after this, so stick with us.